They laughed as they cornered him in the dark, whispering slurs and swinging bats until one blink later, their leader was on the ground unconscious. And the black farmer they mocked stood over him, calm, silent. Malachi Rivers, had been trained to walk silently through jungles, deserts, and war zones. But nothing taught him the kind of silence that fell over a town when a black man bought 200 acres of prime farmland in the heart of a white, conservative county. He didn't need the stares to tell him he didn't belong in their eyes. The long, weathered glances at the diner, the subtle tightening of jaws at the feed store, and the forced politeness at church all said the same thing. You can live here, but don't think you'll ever be one of us. But Malachi didn't care. He hadn't survived gunfire, IEDs, and night raids in Kandahar, to be broken by muttered comments and long glares. His mission was simple: build something with his hands, something that would last beyond war. He had inherited nothing. No family land, no old money. Just a skill set most wouldn't guess from looking at him, a mixture of combat mastery, sharp discipline, and an eye for structure. After retiring from the Navy SEALs, he took his entire savings, cashed out every investment, and bought the Rivers farmstead, a broken, overgrown stretch of land once belonging to a runaway slave colony in the 1800s, while locals referred to it as cursed. Haunted or abandoned, Malachi saw soil rich with history. He saw fields that hadn't been nurtured, only neglected. He saw opportunity and healing. On day 1, he cleared the field with a machete and bare hands. On day 10, he had a working water line from the spring at the back of the woods. By month 3, his first crop of sweet corn had grown so strong that even the town agricultural inspector had to raise an impressed eyebrow. But the whispers didn't stop, neither did the signs. It started with tire tracks across his rows of lettuce. Then came the broken fencing, then a bucket of nails dumped at his driveway's mouth. It was all designed to feel like accidents, but Malachi had trained to spot sabotage half a world away. He saw their cowardice clearly, yet he said nothing. He didn't retaliate. He waited. Among those watching him with particular hatred was Wade Colton, a 30-something troublemaker with deep roots in Haven Creek and a deeper inheritance of hate. Wade's father ran the county's gun shop. His cousin was a deputy. His crew of tattooed, beer-guzzling lackeys treated racism like a family sport. The idea that some outsider, a black man, no less, had bought land near them, boiled Wade's blood. And when Malachi turned down Wade's not-so-subtle offer to sell out before trouble finds you, that blood boiled hotter. But Wade had no clue who he was dealing with. To him, Malachi was just a quiet farmer with muscles and a mysterious past. He didn't know about the 12 classified operations Malachi had led. He didn't know Malachi could shoot the wing off a fly from 200 meters or move through brush without snapping a twig. Didn't know the man he called Boy had once single-handedly extracted a kidnapped diplomat from a Taliban compound with nothing but a dagger and a rope. What Wade did know, unfortunately, was that the town's unwritten rules always favored men like him. So he began organizing more aggressive reminders for Malachi. A spray-painted slur on the side of the barn, a chicken coop set ablaze in the night, a Molotov cocktail that missed its mark and only lit up Malachi's scarecrow. Malachi replaced each loss without drama, silently reinforcing his home with sandbags, motion lights, and subtle security. But the town didn't know those lights were paired with infrared cameras, a gift from an old SEAL friend. And each trespasser was caught, logged, tagged, tracked without ever realizing it. Then came the day of the town's annual harvest parade, when Malachi entered the farmers' competition with the largest squash anyone had seen in decades. Murmurs and tension, he won second place. That small ribbon and the attention it brought was the tipping point. The crowd's applause was too much for Wade and his crew, who saw it as a threat to their twisted hierarchy. And so, the night after the parade, they came. 4 pickup trucks. 8 men, shotguns, chains, flashlights, masks. They cut the power to Malachi's barn, hoping to lure him out. They circled the house, barking racist slurs, revving engines, crushing tomato plants under tires. One of them shouted, "Come out, farmer boy. We just want to talk. Another fired a shell into the air. A third tossed a rock through a window. They expected panic. Maybe a 911 call. Maybe silence. What they got instead was nothing. No lights. No voices. No footsteps. The field seemed to go still, until a low, cold voice behind them said, "That was a mistake." Wade spun first, but the beam of his flashlight caught only Malachi's fist before it caught his jaw. He dropped instantly. One of the others raised his shotgun, only to have it ripped from his grip by a sudden surgical blow to the wrist. Another turned to run, but tripped over what looked like a spike trap, a homemade deterrent Malachi had crafted weeks ago, just in case. What unfolded next was not a fight, it was a lesson. One by one, Malachi disabled them, using non-lethal but devastating moves. He could have ended lives. Dead, he chose to shatter egos. Bones were broken, egos were bruised. One man wet himself, another begged for mercy. And the whole time Malachi said nothing more than necessary. His face was stone. His movements were fluid, controlled, deadly, when the last of them limped back. Toward their trucks, Malachi stood in the center of the wreckage, breathing slowly, not a drop of blood on him. His olive shirt glowed under the security lights. The seal tattoo peeked out from his rolled-up sleeve like a warning label. The police came later, of course summoned by Wade's cousin, the deputy. But by then, Malachi had already laid out. Video footage, GPS data, and full names, times, and coordinates of every step the gang had taken that night. The sheriff, an older man who remembered Malachi's service from whispers among federal agents, looked at the footage, then at the bruised men, then at Malachi and nodded quietly. "I think we can call this self-defense," he said. Hell. Of a case study in restraint, the town would not be the same after that night. Some saw Malachi as a hero, some saw him as a threat. But none saw him as just a farmer anymore. Sunrise had never felt more symbolic than it did the morning after the attack. The golden hue swept across the broken fence posts, crushed tomato plants, and deep tire tracks left by Wade's trucks. But on the porch, standing tall with a calm defiance, was Malachi Rivers' hands wrapped around a steaming mug of black coffee, eyes fixed on the horizon like a man who'd already conquered worse than what lay ahead. The wind swept gently across the cornfields, bending the stalks in a bow-like rhythm, as if even the land was acknowledging what had just transpired. Word spread fast through Haven Creek. By breakfast, the local Facebook group had exploded. By lunch, whispers had become shouted theories. And by dinner, Malachi's name had been cemented in every household as either a problem or a protector. Most of the town's good old boys couldn't believe it. Wade's gang, untouchable and feared, had been dismantled by one man, not just any man, a black man, quiet one. One they never saw coming. The sheriff, to his credit, had shut down any plans to investigate Malachi. The footage was airtight. Wade's bruised and broken goons were no victims. But just because the law had spoken didn't mean the streets were ready to move on. People like Wade didn't let go of hate, they sharpened it into new weapons. For Malachi, the attack had changed more than just the town's perception. It activated something inside him he thought he'd left in Afghanistan. The awareness. The alertness. It's a deep, tactical analysis of every movement, every shadow, every unusual sound. He didn't want war, but he also wasn't naive enough to think it was over. Not by a long shot, so he adapted. During the day, continued farming, rebuilding what had been damaged, reinforcing his fences, inspecting the cornfields and cabbage rows with the same precision he once applied to recon missions. At night, he upgraded. Security systems were wired to a private satellite link. Cameras were hidden in trees, drones were programmed to patrol the skies, and motion sensors laced the outer fields. The barn now had a false wall, a tactical room filled with gear he'd kept packed in a sealed footlocker since retiring. Never thought he'd need it again, and yet he did. Across town, Wade was licking his wounds, both physical and psychological. His arm in a sling, his jaw wired shut, he had become the punchline of every barroom joke and coffee shop whisper. His bruises weren't half as painful as his bruised ego. And Wade Colton, born into power and taught that his whiteness meant superiority, couldn't let it stand. He gathered what was left of his broken pride and began reaching out not to his old crew, but to outsiders. People who didn't care about small-town rules, people who believed in something darker, entered the Iron Fang, a small but vicious militia. Group with a reputation for paramilitary activity and anti-government rants. They wore tactical vests, flew Confederate flags, and trained in abandoned barns. Wade offered them land, resources, and motivation. There's a man on my turf who thinks he's untouchable. Oh, I want him taught a lesson he won't walk away from. They agreed. But they weren't interested in graffiti or broken coops. They were planning something far more coordinated, more violent. They studied Malachi's farm layout. They intercepted his outgoing deliveries. They planted spies. They wanted him out, not just out of town, but off the map. Mac, ever the strategist, began sensing the shift. The attacks weren't random anymore. They were timed, calculated. A poisoned waterline here. A hacked signal jammer disabling his drones. Even his mail was intercepted. But they didn't know who they were playing with. Malachi had faced mercenaries before. These men were amateurs by comparison, but dangerous amateurs. That's when he decided to go on the offensive. He reached out to an old SEAL brother, Isaac Hawkins, now running private security for high-profile corporate clients. Hawk owed Malachi his life after a botched op years ago, and he didn't hesitate. Within 48 hours, a van rolled into Haven Creek in the dead of night. Inside, military-grade surveillance, encrypted radios, and Hawk himself built like a tank, with a laugh that could scare thunder. "Hell of a farm you got," Hawk said, stepping onto the porch. "Smells like enemy territory." "Because it is," Malachi replied, handing him a cup of black coffee. "And we're going to clean it up." Together, they mapped out a defensive perimeter unlike anything the militia expected. Hidden tripwires, thermal cams disguised as birdhouses, a buried EMP device capable of knocking out any drone they tried to use. They even set up a false fielded decoy trap made to look like Malachi's bedroom, complete with heat signatures and lights rigged. To a smart system, days passed, then a week, then ... The night came. The Iron Fang made their move at 2:17 a.m. 5 trucks, 10 men, body armor, NVG goggles, silencers. They approached in a perfect V formation across the lower cornfield, just as Hawk predicted. They hit the decoy. First, the explosion was silent, but effective, a flash grenade rigged to blind and disorient. 3 men went down, crying out in confusion. The rest stumbled, trying to regroup, but by then Malachi had already begun countering. One intruder took a tranquilizer dart to the thigh before realizing where it came from. Another was tackled from the trees by Hawk, who used zip ties and duct tape to ensure no screaming. Malachi was a ghost in the dark. He moved without sound, disabling each man with pinpoint precision. One by one, they dropped electrocuted by wires in the soil, blinded by light traps, or pinned by hidden nets. It was surgical, clean, controlled, exactly like a SEAL would. Due by 3:02 a.m., it was over. 9 men unconscious. One still awake, trying to crawl to a walkie. Malachi knelt beside him and removed his mask. "Tell Wade," he said, voice low. "Next time he sends men to my land, they won't leave breathing. Let the man crawl away, half as a message, half as mercy." Then he and Hawk cleaned up the site. No police, no press, just silence and strategy. But this time Malachi didn't go back to pretending he was just a farmer. He stood on his porch at sunrise, arms crossed, and waited. Waited for Wade. Waited for anyone foolish enough to try again. The town was changing. It was time it knew the truth. Malachi Rivers was no longer hiding. He wasn't just a farmer. He was the storm. The sun rose over Haven. The creek in eerie silence, not the peaceful kind, the watchful kind. The kind of quiet that settles when something shifts beneath the surface. And make no mistake, things had shifted. Everyone felt it. After the Iron Fang's failed assault, word spread like lightning through the underground network of militias, survivalists, and fringe nationalists. The black farmer isn't just some ex-military, he's a damn SEAL. But in the town's public spaces, nobody said a word. The sheriff kept things tight-lipped. The deputy who once mocked Malachi now avoided eye contact entirely. The feed store clerk gave extra change. Without a smile, even the pastor who once made sermons about foreign values invading our town started talking about unity and peace. But Malachi wasn't fooled. Silence isn't surrender, it's strategy. It's just like in war, silence can be the most dangerous warning of all. Still, Malachi pressed on with his work. Hawk remained with him, disguised as a farmhand, but wired into a military-grade surveillance rig inside the barn's false wall. The entire farm was a fortress, now camouflaged in nature, but humming with hidden firepower. They even added new defenses, laser perimeter alarms linked to Hawk's tablet, silent detonation flares disguised as fence posts, and a buried line of smoke cannons near the south field that could blanket an entire acre in less than 10 seconds. "You building a damn farm or a battlefield?" Hawk joked one morning, sipping his coffee. Malachi's eyes didn't leave the horizon. "Both. I feed the town with one. I survive it with the other." But as the pressure grew, Malachi wasn't just preparing for another attack. He was digging deeper. He started investigating Wade Colton's connections, not just local goons and cousins in law enforcement, but federal records, past arrests buried by influence, land deeds, campaign donations, militia affiliations. He had files, names, bank transfers, all thanks to his quiet contact at the Department of Homeland Security. A woman named Tasha King owed Malachi for saving her brother years ago, and what they uncovered was explosive. Wade wasn't just hateful. He was deeply invested in a nationwide movement, white nationalist land reclamation, a secret network working to buy up rural land, push out Black and Latino farmers, and build insular, militia-backed zones. They used shell companies, forged legal loopholes, and private security firms to intimidate landowners into selling or abandoning property. Wade's assault on Malachi wasn't just personal, it was political. When Tasha shared the files, Malachi sat in his barn office, staring at the names and maps. "They want a race war," she said over the encrypted call. "They picked the wrong damn battlefield," Malachi replied. And that's when he made the decision. No more playing defense. He would expose them. Not just protect his farm, destroy the entire operation. Malachi and Hawk launched Operation Iron Soil as silent strategic campaign designed to hit the network from the inside out. They started by leaking small bites of information, anonymously: land transaction irregularities, videos of the Iron Fangs training sessions, photos of Wade meeting with known hate group leaders. The files made their way to investigative journalists, legal watchdogs, federal agencies that had been trying to infiltrate the network for years but lacked the proof. But it didn't stop there. Malachi began traveling quietly and with purpose, to nearby towns, to remote counties, meeting with Black and Latino farmers who had suffered the same silent assaults. He brought them evidence, allies, strategies. Some of them had felt alone for years. Malachi showed them that they weren't alone anymore. At home, Hawk kept watch. And when Wade finally caught wind of the leaks, he snapped. Enraged, humiliated, and desperate, Wade made one last call to a mercenary for hire group from out of state. These men weren't amateur militia boys. They were ex-military, dishonorably discharged, paid well, morally bankrupt, known for black bag jobs and off-the-record hits. He told them the target: Malachi Rivers, Black Farmer SEAL. Eliminate him. They arrived quietly, camped in the woods near the North Ridge, tracked Malachi's movements with drones, studied his routes, his routines. Wade promised them a fortune if they made it clean. They promised him silence. But again, Malachi knew. The infrared sensors picked up the movement before they even stepped on the land. Their signal scrambling device failed to block Malachi's internal comm system. And most importantly, Hawk had rigged that North Ridge with motion-triggered pressure alarms tied directly to his wristwatch. So when the mercenaries made their move at 3:47 a.m., expecting a sleeping man in a defenseless house, they walked into a trap more lethal than any battlefield they'd seen. Smoke cannons detonated, turning the woods into a blinding fog. Hawk moved like lightning, disabling their radio comms and baiting 2 men into chasing him toward the electric trap zone. Malachi, dressed in a black tactical suit with night goggles, moved like a shadow, disarming the sniper team first. Then the breacher crew. One tried to run. Malachi caught him mid-sprint, dragged him into the corn rows, and pinned him with a single pressure point to the neck. The man wheezed, panicked. "You ever hear of a ghost named Reaper 3? Malachi whispered. The man nodded, terrified. "That was me, and I'm not done yet." By dawn, the mercs were zip-tied, bruised, and piled. At the edge of the main road, with a note taped to the lead man's vest, "The soil is protected." Sheriff Cruz arrived minutes later, eyes wide. "You handled this without firing a single bullet?" he asked. Malachi nodded. "They brought hate to my land. I gave it back with discipline." The sheriff sighed. "You know this ain't over." "Is?" Malachi said, holding up a flash drive. "'Cause everything they did, it's all going to Washington?" It did. The files Tasha King helped organize were delivered to multiple agencies. Arrests were made in 5 states. A white land reclamation network began to crumble. Wade's shell companies were seized. His father's gun shop raided. His militia pals flipped. The operation collapsed. Back in Haven Creek, Malachi didn't brag, didn't gloat. He went back to planting corn, painting his barn, busting free. Soil education classes for kids. But the town saw, they knew. And slowly, very slowly, some began to change. One day, an old white farmer named Albert came to Malachi with a busted irrigation pump. "I hated you when you got here," he said bluntly. "But you protected this land better than any of us ever did. It's worth something." Malachi repaired the pump without a word. But when Albert left, he left behind something else, a bag of hand-me-down seeds. The kind passed down from generations. The kind only shared with family. That was the beginning. Not of peace, but of possibility. The seasons began to shift in Haven Creek, first in the weather, and then in the people, the cornfields surrounding. Malachi River's land swayed taller than ever, strong and golden, rooted deep in the earth, just like the man who farmed them. But the real harvest wasn't in the soil. It was in the way the town started to look at him. Suspicion turned into wary respect. Distrust turned into quiet acknowledgement. A few folks still clenched their jaws when he walked into the feed store, but they no longer whispered behind his back. After the takedown of the Iron Fang and the exposure of Wade Colton's corrupt militia connections, no one could deny it. Malachi Rivers had protected this town even if they never asked him to. But respect wasn't the same as acceptance. Not yet. Some wounds ran too deep, especially those on the surface. Wade Colton had vanished after the arrests. Rumors swirled like dust storms. Some said he fled the country. Others said he was hiding in a remote cabin in Arkansas. A few insisted he was still around, bitter, broken, and planning his revenge. Malachi didn't care where Wade was. What mattered was that he stayed gone. But Wade's departure didn't erase the damage he'd done. Several families who had allied with him lost land after their dirty deals were exposed. Some blamed Malachi for their downfall, not their own crimes. The sheriff kept the peace as best he could, but beneath the surface, resentment simmered like embers under ash. Still, Malachi kept building. He expanded his farm's irrigation system, added a solar greenhouse, and even launched a new program teaching agricultural skills to young people, especially those from underrepresented communities. His initiative, called Seal the Soil, drew attention from state universities and veteran organizations alike. Donations rolled in, news outlets began calling. One sunny Saturday, a bus full of kids from a nearby city rolled into the farm. White, brown, and everything in between, they came with dirt under their nails and curiosity in their eyes. Malachi gave them a tour, taught them how to test soil pH, and told stories about how farming, like combat, was all about patience, discipline, and knowing your environment. One boy asked him, "Were you scared when those men came to hurt you?" Malachi paused. "Being scared isn't weakness. It's instinct. Courage is what you do with that fear." The boy nodded slowly, his small hand gripping a hoe. Malachi saw something in that boy's eyes, a younger version of himself, full of questions, quiet anger, and a hunger to be seen. But just as Malachi started to believe the storm had passed, trouble returned. In a suit, a man from a powerful agricultural development firm, Carson Graves, arrived in town, claiming to represent the future of sustainable rural investment. He went door to door, buying land left behind by Wade's allies. He offered generous sums to old farmers who were too tired to keep going. At first, it looked like progress. But Malachi's instincts flared the moment Carson stepped onto his farm. Smooth voice, crisp shoes, a smile with too many teeth, eyes that never blinked. "I admire what you've done here," Carson said, walking the rows of squash. "You've proven this town can evolve. I'd like to partner with you, create a flagship farm program. We handle the logistics and marketing. You keep doing what you love." Malachi cut him off. "Shh. And who exactly are you?" Carson chuckled. "Represent Sable River Holdings. We're a vertically integrated agribusiness firm. We own distribution centers, trucking lines, even patentable seed variants. And where do I fit in? As the brand, the face, the legacy, you'd be the example of new black farming success. With our backing, you could expand to 5 states. Malachi's silence was louder than thunder. "I'm not for sale," he finally said. Carson's smile faltered for a second, just enough to show his real face. "Of course," he said, "but everything has a price, even principle." When Carson, left Hawk still living nearby, looked up the company, what they found chilled them both. Sable River Holdings was a front. Paper, it was legal. But beneath the surface, it was tied to the very same white nationalist investors Malachi had. Taken down? After the Iron Fang collapsed, those behind the movement didn't disappear. They just changed masks. New names, new strategies, same mission. Malachi realized this was bigger than Haven Creek, bigger than Wade. They were trying to buy what they couldn't beat. He convened a meeting of farmers from across 3 counties. Some had already sold to Carson, unaware of the connection. Others were considering it. Malachi laid out the entire web, who owned what, how the money moved, what the consequences would be if they lost control of their land. "This is a new kind of war," he said, "not with guns, not with fists, but with contracts. They want to own the land because they know once they control it, they control us." Some pushed back. "What can we do? They're offering too much." "Then we beat them at their own game," Malachi said. "We create our own cope. We share equipment, labor, profits. We protect each other's land. If they want to come for us, they'll have to fight a network, not a name." The Freedom Soil Cooperative was born that night, a collection of independent farmers united by purpose. They shared water rights, machinery, transportation. Malachi used his military logistics skills to map out shipping routes. Hawk trained volunteers on how to defend against sabotage without violence. Tasha King connected them to legal aid. Within months, Sable River Holdings pulled out. Carson Graves disappeared. The board shifted focus to other states. Malachi had done it again, not by going to war, but by building peace stronger than fear. But Wade was still out there, and his story wasn't over, because the man who once crawled away humiliated was watching. From the shadows, this time he wasn't coming alone. The sky over Haven Creek had shifted from blue to the bruised tones of storm gray. But it was not rain that was coming, it was reckoning. The air was heavy with the tension of unfinished battles, of ancient hatred colliding with modern resilience. And as Malachi Rivers walked the length of his repaired fence line, his boots pressing into the darkened earth, the whispers of his past grew louder with every step. The night before had ended with more than broken ribs and wounded pride for Wade Colton. He and his gang had limped away from Malachi's land, humiliated, their weapons stripped, their tactics outplayed by a man they'd grossly underestimated. But they hadn't learned their lesson. For men like Wade, humiliation didn't spark reflection, it ignited obsession. Malachi stood at the corner post, his sharp eyes scanning the tree line beyond. The wind carried more than leaves. Carried the scent of fear, anger, and something deeper, a promise that this wasn't over. But Malachi wasn't a man who bowed to threats. He was forged in combat, in fire, in the silence between sniper shots and extraction orders. This land, his legacy, would not be taken from him, not by cowards, not by racists, not by anyone. Inside the house, Amara tended to Jacob, who now insisted on helping Malachi more and more. The boy's admiration had bloomed into something fiercey. No longer saw Malachi as just a farmer, but as a warrior, a protector. And Amara, she saw him differently now too. There was a softness in her gaze, not of pity but of understanding. She had seen the fire in him, the same fire she had when defending wrongfully convicted clients. The same fire she saw in herself when standing before corrupt judges. Wade's not going to stop. She said quietly over dinner, the rain now. Beginning to spit against the window pane? I know, Malachi replied, chewing slowly.
Ow.
That's why I'm not waiting for him to make the next move. He pushed away from the table and disappeared into the back room. When he returned, his old military gear was slung over his shoulder. Camouflage fatigues, a vest lined with tactical tools, a matte black rifle, and a bag of surveillance equipment. Jacob's eyes widened. Are you going to war? Malachi didn't smile, but his voice was calm. No, I'm going to finish one. That night, Malachi became the SEAL again. Not a farmer, not a man repairing fence posts, but a ghost in the woods. He crept through the thickets surrounding his land, installing motion sensors, hidden trail cams, and tripwires designed to alert, not harm. He moved with precision, silent as the wind, his presence unnoticed even by the night creatures. And then, deep in the pines, he found it. A crude camp. Tarp tents, beer bottles, spray cans, and hate symbols etched onto wooden boards. A base of operations for Wade's gang, close enough to strike, hidden enough to retreat. Malachi crouched low, observing every detail. 3 men inside, armed. One polishing a rifle, another loading something into a sack. He recorded everything. By sunrise, the evidence was already uploaded to a secure server. Malachi wasn't just preparing to defend his land, he was building a case. Because a war like this wasn't just fought with fists and fire, it was fought in courts and headlines. In the hearts of those who watched from the sidelines. But as the community watched, something began to shift. The news of the attack on Malachi now trickling out through whispers. A leaked photo of Wade's broken nose and rumors of a military grade. Beatdown had begun to spread through town. Many were still afraid to speak, but not all. A local pastor, Reverend Langston, stepped forward and invited Malachi to speak at the Unity Hall, once a place divided by segregation, now a community space. I don't want a stage, Malachi had said at first. But sometimes, brother. Reverend Langston replied, standing silent only helps the ones shouting lies. So Malachi agreed. The hall was full that Thursday night. Farmers, teachers, teenagers, and old men in worn denim sat shoulder to shoulder. Some expected a fiery speech. Others expected a war story. What they got was a quiet, clear voice that spoke of legacy, of land soaked in generations of sweat, of the right to live free of fear. He didn't name Wade or his gang, but everyone knew. Courage, Malachi said, isn't the absence of fear. It's walking straight into it with purpose. The room fell into a silence so thick it felt sacred. Later that night as he walked back to his truck, someone had keyed the word liar into his driver's side door. But taped under the windshield wiper was a folded note that read, "We stand with you." The Mitchells, he showed the note to Amara later, and she smiled with a mix of pride and concern. People are watching, she said. I'm counting. On it, Malachi answered. Back at the camp, Wade was unraveling. His hand was still wrapped, his ego still bruised, and now some of his boys were nervous. One had even quit, claiming that farmers not normal. Wade smashed a bottle and roared, "We finish this or we ain't men." And so they planned the next strike, not to scare, not to sabotage, but to destroy the tension over Haven. Creek had reached a boiling point. Malachi Rivers, the once silent farmer, had thrown off the cloak of restraint. His Navy SEAL instincts had taken over, and the rules had changed. The land that had seen generations of black toil was now a battlefield. Once more, but this time, son of that soil was ready for war. It started with the sound of tires screeching just after midnight. Malachi, already awake in a darkened farmhouse, lit only by the moon and a flickering oil lamp, stood by the window. In the distance, he saw the pickup trucks, the same kind Wade Colton's crew used sliding to a stop near the tree line. From his vantage point, he counted at least 7 men, all armed. They crept with flashlights and rifles toward the barn, unaware that every square foot of the land had been carefully mapped. Booby-trapped and secured, Malachi's breathing was slow, steady. He wore black tactical pants, a combat vest, and his Navy Trident necklace. His boots were tightly laced. Checked the time, 2:03 a.m., he stepped into the shadows of the house and picked up his suppressed AR-15. From his service days, along with his military-grade drone controller and an encrypted body cam. Tonight would not be reactionate, would be precision. As the first man tried to cut through the barn lock, a tripwire snapped, but instead of an explosion, it triggered a floodlight, blinding the intruders. Chaos erupted. What the hell? Someone yelled, stumbling backward. Another dropped his weapon only to hear it skitter across gravel, and from above them buzzing. Slicing the quiet like an electric mosquito, Malachi's drone zipped across the treetops, beaming live footage to his monitor. Each face recorded, each voice documented. Then Malachi moved like a ghost. He didn't attack immediately, he stalked. One by one, he isolated them. The first was a lanky teen named Cole, who had joined Wade's crew for thrills. Malachi grabbed him by the collar from behind and whispered, "You ever seen Death Blink?" before dragging him unconscious into a hayloft, tying his hands with zip ties, and planting a GPS tag on his belt. The second and third fell, in tandem. Malachi dropped a smoke canister near the silo, and as the 2 gang members turned toward the noise, he tackled them from the shadows, knocking them out cold and stacking them like logs near the broken tractor. Wade, meanwhile, was circling near the porch, unaware that the hunter was circling him. He had a shotgun in one hand, a flashlight in the other, and a mouth full of anger. "Come out, you coward," he shouted. "This is our town. You think you can play soldier on our land?" From the roof, Malachi lowered a rope silently and rappelled down behind Wade. In one swift move, he twisted the shotgun out of his hands and pinned him to the porch railing. "You don't know what land means?" Wade, Malachi said coldly. "You inherited Hayti, earned every acre I bleed on." The confrontation was brutal but efficient. Malachi didn't kill. He disarmed, dismantled, and documented. By the time local police, alerted by a military-secured emergency beacon Malachi activated, arrived on the scene, 7 men were bound, weaponless, and crying in the grass, surrounded by drone footage, infrared screenshots, and surveillance. Data that made any excuses impossible. Sheriff Albright, usually cautious, arrived with his deputies in disbelief. "What the hell happened here?" he muttered. Malakad, calm and composed, handed him a flash drive. "Every second, every face, every word. This land is mine. These men tried to wage war on a veteran and a citizen. Now the world gets to see what they really are." But Malachi's war wasn't over. While Wade and his crew were charged with attempted assault, trespassing, and hate crimes, a deeper rot remained. Reports emerged of local officials, judges, deputies, and council members who had turned blind eyes to the gang's years of terror. One by one, their names started to surface, leaked anonymously to the press. Tied to Malachi's investigative efforts and the media, they had caught wind of it all. CNN, NPR, and local outlets converged on Haven Creek, each eager to cover a story of the black farmer who dismantled a racist gang without firing a single fatal shot. But Malachi didn't seek fame. When a reporter tried to ask him for an interview, he simply said, "Tell the story right. Not about me, but about what's been buried under these fields for too long." With the arrests made and the headlines spreading, Haven Creek had changed, but peace was still fragile. Malachi knew the battle had entered a new phase, legal, systemic, and psychological. His land was safer, but the fight for respect, justice, and memory was just beginning. And as dawn broke on his reclaimed land, Malachi Rivers stood once again. At the edge of his field, calm, unflinching, and ready for whatever came next. Haven Creek was waking up, but not to peace. It was waking to reckoning. The waves Malachi Rivers had stirred could no longer be ignored or silenced. The white nationalist network, crippled but still dangerous, shifted gears. They went underground, moving through layers of society like ghosts, quiet, relentless, patient. Malachi's farm had become a symbol, a beacon for those hungry for justice and the reclamation of land stolen by generations of oppression. People from neighboring counties and even cities reached out, inspired by his courage. But the pushback was fiercer than ever. One evening, as Malachi was checking irrigation lines, his phone buzzed with an encrypted message. The sender, Tasha King. Urgent. There's movement. Get ready. Within 48 hours, Malachi and Hawk met in the Barn Turn Command Center, studied satellite maps, online chatter, and leaked intel. A shadowy figure named Marcus Trent had risen to lead the splinter factions of the militia groups, coordinating attacks and intimidation. Campaigns against black farmers in the region. Trent was ruthless, charismatic, and resourceful. Malachi didn't hesitate. He sent word to the Freedom Soil Cooperative, alerting all members. Together, they planned a defensive network, coordinated patrols, shared communication channels, and emergency response drills. It was a grassroots army built from soil and sweat. Meanwhile, Malachi's story caught the attention of a documentary filmmaker named Elena Ramirez. She arrived at the farm with her crew, eager to capture the man behind the myth. Elena was fierce, empathetic, and unafraid of the uncomfortable truths Malachi represented. Over weeks of filming, Elena saw the layers beneath the stoic farmer, the man who lost family to systemic violence, who found solace and strength in service, and who now cultivated not just crops but hope. One afternoon, Elena interviewed Malachi near the barn. A drone flew overhead. Malachi's instincts kicked in instantly. He caught the drone's GPS signal and traced it back to a nearby property, an abandoned farmhouse used as a militia lookout. Without hesitation, Malachi and Hawk organized a covert reconnaissance mission. Using night vision goggles and encrypted radios, they infiltrated the location, uncovering weapons caches, disturbing propaganda materials, and a detailed plan to sabotage several farms during the upcoming harvest season. The documentary crew captured it all on tape, the stakes, the threat, and the resilience. When news of the discovery broke, the region rallied. Local law enforcement, pressured by the public and federal agencies, began cracking down on the militia cells. But Malachi knew the fight extended beyond arrests. It was cultural. It was economic. It was about reclaiming dignity. He expanded Sealed the Soil into an educational initiative, bringing together veterans, farmers, and youth to learn not only sustainable agriculture, but also community defense, legal rights, and history. Malachi's farm became a hub, a fortress of knowledge, resistance, and solidarity. But as the militia fractured, new challenges emerged. Cyber attacks, misinformation campaigns, and economic pressure tested the cooperative's unity. One morning, Malachi woke to find that several irrigation pumps had been sabotaged, threatening weeks of crops. A call to his contacts revealed it was part of a wider, coordinated attack on black-owned farms nationwide. With Hawk's tech expertise and Tasha's legal backing, Malachi spearheaded a coalition of farmers and activists lobbying for federal protections, emergency aid, and harsher penalties for hate-driven sabotage. Through late-night calls, rallies, and media appearances, Malachi became more than a farmer or former Navy SEAL. He was a movement in Haven Creek was the ground zero. The struggle was far from over, but for the first time in a long time, the roots of resistance were digging deep. The late summer sun cast long shadows across Malachi River's fields, illuminating rows of corn that stood taller and stronger than ever before. This was more than just a harvest, it was a symbol of survival, resilience, and triumph against the tide of hate and oppression. News crews buzzed around the farm, her cameras capturing the vibrancy of the land and the determination in Malachi's eyes. Yet behind the scenes, the work was far from over. The coalition Malachi helped forge had grown exponentially, spanning multiple states and bringing together farmers, veterans, activists, and everyday citizens united by a common cause. They shared resources, strategies, and hope, standing as a bulwark against the forces seeking to undermine them. But the militia's remnants still lurked in the shadows, desperate to reclaim what they had lost. Their tactics had evolved: cyber attacks, misinformation campaigns, and economic sabotage tested the coalition's strength and resolve. Malachi, ever the strategist, doubled down on community building. He hosted workshops, mentoring sessions, and cultural events celebrating Black farming heritage. The farm became a sanctuary where stories were shared, wounds healed, and futures planned. One evening, as twilight settled, Malachi stood at the edge of his property, watching children run through the fields, laughter echoing in the air. He thought of the battles fought, the threats faced, the alliances forged, and knew the journey was ongoing. But in that moment, surrounded by life and light, he felt a profound peace. The land was more than soil and crops. It was legacy. It was love. It was home. As autumn settled over Haven Creek, Malachi Rivers stood in the golden fields, the crisp air filled with the scent of earth and ripening crops. The farm had become a beacon, not just of agriculture, but of hope and resistance against deep-rooted hatred. But even as the community thrived, shadows lingered. New threats emerged from unexpected places. Corporate interests masked as sustainability advocates, political pressure to sell land, and online campaigns aiming to discredit Malachi's growing influence. Unfazed, Malachi leaned into the power of unity. The Freedom Soil Cooperative expanded its reach, incorporating workshops on digital security, legal advocacy, and community organizing. Malachi knew the fight was no longer just physical. It was ideological and systemic. Late one evening, Malachi received a call from Tasha King. A whistleblower inside the Department of Agriculture had uncovered a conspiracy. Subsidies and grants were being funneled to corporations intent on driving independent farmers off their land. The evidence was damning. Mobilizing quickly, Malachi coordinated a multi-state campaign to expose the corruption, engaging journalists, allies in Congress, and grassroots activists. The pressure mounted, forcing federal investigations and reforms. Meanwhile, the farm itself flourished, a testament to resilience, hard work, and unyielding spirit. Malachi often walked the rows of his fields at dusk, reflecting on how far he'd come from a lone farmer facing violent gangs to a leader spearheading a movement for justice. The journey was far from over, but the harvest was sweet. Reminder that even in the darkest soil, seeds of hope could take root and grow. Winter had wrapped Haven Creek in a quiet blanket of snow, transforming the landscape into a serene white canvas. Yet beneath the stillness, the fire of change blazed hotter than ever. Malachi Rivers, standing tall in his weathered jacket and worn boots, surveyed the farm that had become a symbol of defiance and hope. The battles had been fierce, the scars deep, but the soil beneath his feet held the promise of new beginnings. With the Freedom Soil Cooperative stronger than ever, Malachi worked tirelessly to secure grants and partnerships that empowered Black farmers and veterans alike. His efforts had drawn national attention from activists to policymakers, all eager to support the movement he had ignited. But success brought new challenges. Powerful interests sought to co-opt or silence the movement, launching misinformation, campaigns, and lobbying against reforms undeterred. Malachi doubled down on community engagement, education, and transparency. He traveled the country, sharing his story, training new leaders, and building alliances that transcended race and geography. One crisp morning, as dawn broke over the frost-covered fields, Malachi stood beside a group of young farmers, next generation of stewards, and spoke with quiet conviction. "We inherit the land, but it's up to us to protect it, not just for ourselves, but for those who come after. This is more than farming, it's freedom." As the sun rose higher, illuminating the fields of green beneath the snow's thaw, a new chapter began, one where courage, resilience, and unity would continue to shape the future. Spring had arrived, painting Haven Creek with bursts of color and new life. The air was alive with the hum of bees and the promise of growth. Malachi Rivers walked among his crops, the weight of seasons past settling into a quiet strength within him. The farm was no longer just his, belonged to a community united by struggle and hope. The Freedom Soil Cooperative had blossomed into a nationwide network, bridging divides and rewriting narratives about black farmers, veterans, and resilience. But Malachi never forgot the sacrifices the nights spent in the dark. The threats whispered in shadows, the battles fought with both grit and grace. Each furrow in the land told a story. Each seed planted was an act of rebellion and renewal. As he stood beneath a blossoming oak, Malachi thought of his ancestors, those who had tilled the earth despite chains, those who had dreamed of freedom. Even when the world denied them, his own legacy was forged in that soil, a testament to courage, honor, and unyielding spirit. With a steady hand, Malachi began marking out a new plot, community garden dedicated to healing, education, and remembrance. Here stories would be shared, futures cultivated, and the roots of justice dug ever deeper. The journey was far from over, but the harvest was rich in strength, unity, and hope, and Malachi Rivers was ready to lead it all. The chill of early winter lingered in the air, but the spirit of Haven Creek was warmer than ever. Malachi Rivers stood before a gathering of farmers, veterans, activists, and neighbors, many from diverse backgrounds, all united by a shared mission. The Freedom Soil Cooperative had blossomed beyond expectations, growing into a powerful network that combined the wisdom of generations with the tactical acumen of veterans like Malachi and Hawk. They shared tools, resources, and strategies, building a safety net that protected not only land but lives. But with growth came challenges. Large agribusinesses continued to push aggressive buyouts, and covert campaigns aimed to destabilize the cooperative's progress. Malachi and his allies knew they needed more than grassroots resistance, they needed influence. Working with Tasha King, the cooperative launched a campaign to lobby lawmakers for protections tailored to minority farmers, increase funding for rural development, and harsher penalties for racially motivated sabotage. Malachi's speeches, powerful and heartfelt, echoed through state capitals and community halls alike. He spoke not just for himself, but for every farmer who had been marginalized, every veteran who felt forgotten, and every child dreaming of a future connected to the land. As winter gave way to spring, new farms joined the cooperative. Workshops on sustainable farming, cybersecurity, and community defense flourished. The cooperative's collective voice became impossible to ignore. One evening, as Malachi walked through his barn, Hawk approached with news. The federal investigation into the militia and corrupt officials had yielded arrests and policy changes. Justice was inching closer. But Malachi knew the journey wasn't just about fighting enemies. It was about building a legacy, and together, they were planting seeds that would grow for generations. Spring's full bloom brought new challenges and opportunities to Haven Creek. The Freedom Soil Cooperative had grown into a formidable force, transforming farmland and mines alike. Malachi Rivers stood at the forefront, a symbol of resilience, leadership, and hope. With renewed energy, Cooperative launched its most ambitious project yet, a regional food hub designed to empower local farmers by connecting them directly with markets, restaurants, and consumers. This initiative aimed to break the grip of exploitative middlemen and give control back to the people who worked the land. But as the cooperative's influence expanded, so did the resistance. Powerful agribusiness lobbies and shadowy interests fought back with lobbying, media campaigns, and legal challenges. Malachi and his team navigated this new battlefield with the same strategy and precision that had defined their earlier fights. At the heart of it all was community. Malachi's farm became a gathering place, a space for dialogue, education, and celebration. Festivals honoring Black agricultural heritage brought diverse crowds together, strengthening bonds and fostering understanding. One afternoon, while overseeing the planting of heirloom seeds donated by a historic seed bank, Malachi reflected on the journey. From being cornered by a racist gang to leading a movement reshaping rural America, his path was marked by struggle and triumph. He knew the tide was rising, not just in Haven Creek, but across the nation. And as long as they stood united, there was no force strong enough to wash away their roots. The heat of summer pressed down on Haven Creek, but the spirit of the Freedom Soil Cooperative burned brighter than ever. Malachi Rivers stood at the edge of a freshly tilled field, surveying the ground where the cooperative's first community farming education center would rise, a beacon of knowledge, resilience, and empowerment. This center wasn't just about teaching agriculture, it was about rewriting the story. It would be a place where veterans, young people, and marginalized farmers could learn sustainable farming, self-defense, leadership, and legal rights, a holistic approach to survival and success in a world that had to often try to hold them down. As bulldozers rumbled and foundations were laid, Malachi met with local officials, activists, and educators, forging partnerships to ensure the center's success. The project faced obstacles, bureaucratic delays, funding challenges, subtle opposition, but Malachi's determination never wavered. In the evenings, he returned to his farm, tending the land with the same care and precision that had carried him through battles past and present. The fields were lush, the crops thriving, testament to hard work and hope. But beyond the soil and structures, Malachi nurtured something even more vital: community. The cooperative members, once scattered and isolated, has become a family bound by shared purpose. As the first beams of the education center rose toward the sky, so too did the dreams of a new generation, one ready to cultivate change, justice, and legacy. The education center's grand opening drew crowds from across the region. Farmers, veterans, students, and activists gathered beneath banners proclaiming growth, strength, unity. Malachi Rivers stood at the podium, his voice steady and full of conviction. "This center is more than bricks and mortar," he said. "It's a symbol, a promise to our ancestors, to our children, and to ourselves, that we will cultivate not only the land, but also hope, knowledge, and justice." Workshops sprang to life: soil science, tactical defense, legal literacy, all taught by experts and elders who carried the wisdom of generations. Young faces lit up with excitement as they learned how to steward the earth and protect their communities. Meanwhile, the cooperative continued to expand, securing grants, land, and partnerships. Malachi's leadership had turned a small farm into a movement that challenged systems and lifted voices long ignored. At night, as the center's lights glowed against the dark sky, Malachi walked the grounds, feeling a deep sense of peace. The battles had been hard fought, but the harvest was rich not just in crops, but in community, strength, and legacy. The story of Haven Creek and of Malachi Rivers was far from over. But with roots this deep, the future was bright. The years had etched lines on Malachi Rivers' face, but his eyes still burned with the fire of a man who had faced down hatred and emerged stronger. Haven Creek was no longer just a town, it was a movement, symbol of resilience and reclamation. Malachi stood atop the ridge overlooking his farm, watching as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden light over the fields. The cooperative had grown into a nationwide network, influencing policy, educating future leaders, and inspiring countless others to reclaim their land and stories. But Malachi knew that vigilance was eternal. New challenges would arise: political shifts, economic pressures, and old prejudices masked in new forms. Yet armed with knowledge, unity, and unbreakable spirit, the community was ready as children played in the education center's garden and veterans shared stories beneath ancient oaks. Malachi felt a profound sense of fulfillment. The legacy he had fought to protect was alive, rooted in the soil, nurtured by community and reaching toward the sky. The battle had changed him, but it had also transformed a generation. And as the stars emerged, Malachi Rivers smiled, ready to face whatever dawn awaited. Years had passed, and Malachi Rivers' story had become legend in Haven Creek and far beyond. The farm, once a solitary bastion against hate, now thrived as the heart of a nationwide movement. Young farmers, veterans, and activists carried forward the work Malachi had begun, each adding their own voice and strength to the cause. Malachi, now a mentor and elder statesman, walked the fields with a quiet pride. The land was vibrant, yielding rich harvests and fresh hope. His children and grandchildren played beneath the sprawling trees, learning the value of hard work, resilience, and community. The education center flourished, hosting conferences, workshops, and celebrations that brought together diverse communities, dedicated to justice and sustainability. Though the battles for equality and land rights were ongoing, the foundation was strong. Malachi's vision of empowerment, unity, and dignity had taken root in hearts across the country. As the sun set over Haven Creek, Malachi looked to the horizon, knowing that while his journey was nearing its twilight, the seeds he planted would bloom for generations to come. The seasons cycled, and Haven Creek stood resilient, its people united by the soil beneath their feet and the battles they had endured together. Malachi Rivers, now revered not only as a farmer, but as a guardian of justice, continued to guide the community with wisdom born from experience. Challenges evolved, but never ceased. New waves of systemic obstacles emerged: climate change, economic instability, and social unrest, but the cooperative's foundation held firm. Malachi's focus expanded beyond the farm. He collaborated with other leaders nationwide, sharing strategies and fostering alliances to protect Black land ownership and advocate for rural justice. Under his mentorship, a new generation of leaders rose: veterans, farmers, and activists, ready to carry the torch. One crisp autumn morning, Malachi gathered with them beneath the giant oak at the heart of the education center. He spoke of duty not just to the land, but to each other. "The soil remembers our footsteps," he said. "It holds our stories, our struggles, and our victories. We are its guardians. We protect it, and in return, it sustains us." Leaves fell around them. The group pledged their commitment to honor the past and secure the future. Malachi smiled, knowing the legacy was safe in capable hands. Winter winds howled through Haven Creek, but inside the cooperative's education center, warmth and determination filled the air. Malachi Rivers and his team were facing a new challenge. An unprecedented storm had struck the region, threatening crops, homes, and the very survival of the farming community. The cooperative mobilized quickly, using lessons learned from years of struggle. They implemented emergency protocols, shared resources, and coordinated relief efforts. Malachi's military experience proved invaluable as he led teams through floodwaters and downed power lines, ensuring everyone was safe and cared for. Outside the storm's fury, the community's spirit was unbreakable. Neighbors helped neighbors, strangers became family, and the cooperative's bonds grew stronger. Amid the crisis, Malachi reflected on the journey from being cornered by hate-filled gangs to becoming a leader who inspired resilience and unity. In the face of adversity, as the storm clouds cleared and sunlight returned, the cooperative prepared for rebuilding. The land, like its people, was scarred but alive, and so was hope. As the sun set over Haven Creek one last time, Malachi Rivers stood tall amidst the fields he had fought so fiercely to protect. The scars of battle lingered, but they were outweighed by the roots he had planted, roots of courage, unity, and unwavering hope. Around him, the community he helped build thrived, a living testament to resilience against hate and injustice. His journey from soldier to farmer, from solitary defender to beacon of a movement, had carved a legacy that would endure far beyond his years. In the quiet breeze, whispering through the leaves, was a promise: the land, and those who love it, would always rise again.